So today we're going to start off with administration. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides and then we'll have a demo of that. So in Log Insight, we have System Monitor, and this is going to monitor all the nodes in the cluster, and it's going to show resource usage by individual node. You also have the option to check active queries. So if someone initiates a query that's extremely long running, you can actually go in and cancel that query in System Monitor. You'll also get statistics on log ingestion rate and storage usage. For cluster management, this is where you would go to restart services, or in the case of an upgrade. If you're downloading a support or doing a support bundle, this is also where you'd go. Sorry, I got ahead of myself on the upgrade slide. So you would select the single node that you want to get a log bundle for, or you can just download a support bundle for the whole cluster, which is what you would typically be doing unless the problem was specific to one node. For the cluster upgrade, you always want to upgrade a cluster from the master node. So you would connect to, in this case, fd-vRLI01, and you would start the upgrade by uploading the pack file to the server. And once that node is upgraded, it will roll through and upgrade the rest of the nodes. When the upgrade is complete, you will get an email notification stating that. And the upgrade process is pretty slick. It doesn't, it rolls through at, I would say, maybe 10 minutes per node. For access control, we have typically, we're going to be using Identity Manager. Our customers are hopefully using Active Directory or Identity Manager. So you can add new users here. If you add somebody from VMware Identity Manager and VIDM does not recognize the username, it's going to give you a warning saying that it's not finding them in the directory. As far as local user accounts, the way that works now is when you create a new user, you have to enter an email address for a local account, and it will send an email to the new user and ask them to set their password there. So you do not set the password for them. So that was a security modification, and we did that for FIPS compliance, and I'll demo that as well. As far as access controls, we do allow you to create custom roles. And you can do that by, if you want to limit access by a subset, you could use a data set to do that. And in this case, we just want to limit a security team's access, so they only have access to our Wenatchee data center. And so when they go in to view logs, they're not able to see things in our Santa Clara data center, for example. And you could set this to view different log sources or types for data sets. You can use similar filters to that, to what we use in interactive analytics. For log forwarding, you can use filters. So on the right hand, I have some example of what filters you could use. In this case, we're just forwarding our logs to another instance of Log Insight. We also, you can filter for a SIM solution using certain criteria, and I'll kind of go through that a little bit more detail in the demo, but I have a slide here where we are basically tagging the events that we're sending to another source. So we're doing all the sudo logs for Linux in this case. This is an example of a filter you could use for forwarding to Splunk or another SIM solution. So we're just looking for text matches based on various criteria. And this is just an example of this in action. So we're filtering and sending all of these events. For disaster recover or high availability to have duplicate log sources, we use tagging. And for a tag to be, so on forwarding so here we're forwarding to DC2, right? And we're going to add a tag that the source is DC1. So then at the other side, we're actually going to drop the tags with that filter. So you do need to be aware that when you're tagging logs on a forwarding event, it's not going to have that tag available to filter on until the first log is ingested. So you would set up site 1 first. So we're forwarding, in this instance, DC1 to DC2. And we're applying the filter that it doesn't match DC1. So this assumes that we've already ingested at least one log with that tag. And so this is going to make it so that it's not going to re-ingest its own logs. And I'll also show you that as part of the demo. We have a new option to forward syslog and SSL using 8.2. You do need to use a transport of TCP for this. One thing to note, whenever you're doing syslog forwarding, it's not going to preserve the source address. So when you are able to, I would suggest using the API, because then it will preserve the log information with the correct source. Otherwise, if you're doing syslog, it's going, so say I'm forwarding from one instance to another, the source on that destination is going to read all from the same server, right? It's going to read every single log was forwarded from this login site server. So the source for all those log messages is going to be that forwarding server. Couple things to note. If you're doing extensive filtering on log forwarding or using regex values, this can have an impact on performance. Now you can have up to 10 forwarders, but if you are doing it, just be aware that if every single one of those forwarders has extensive filtering where you're not just forwarding all or forwarding from a host, but you're actually going through, like we kind of did for the SIM solution example, and filtering on various text fields, there is overhead involved with that. And as I described, log forwarding across data center, you have to use tagging for that. Otherwise, you're going to create a loop. The log forwarding destination should be backed by similar processing. So like if you're forwarding all your logs from one site to another, like we would do for that HADR scenario, you want to make sure that they're sized exactly the same. Configuring partitions for variable retention, you can have up to 4 partitions. And so you would have 5 total with the inclusion of the default partition. And you can define a separate retention period for each of the partitions. And then we do have a tech preview API for managing this. So this isn't officially supported yet. So for this example, we're saying all log sources from VRAPs, we want to set that retention to 7 days. So automatically after that last bucket in the 7-day retention is full, it's going to purge those logs. Or it's going to allow them to be overridden. In 8.1, we introduced the variable retention, but we didn't have these fields for storage usage and oldest log time. So we've added this so that customers can easily see if they're in compliance with their retention period. So we have this set to 1 day, and it's going to purge all the logs after that time period. So the way this works, we have the ingestion pipeline and we have several buckets, right? So we're going to get a log stream message and it's going to come in to the default partition if it doesn't match a filter criteria. Once that bucket is full, so it's capped at 500 megs, once it hits that bucket's going to be archived and sealed, and it will no longer accept logs into that bucket. And then we'll open a new 500 megabyte bucket. And as that fills up, it will be sealed. After the retention period is met, that bucket's going to be deleted. So if we're using a filter, we've got this bucket A, and so we have a log message, and we have this bucket B. So we have log messages come in. And so this one is going to, it doesn't meet partition 1 or partition 2 filters, so it's going to go to the default partition. And we've got, oops, I'm sorry, I clicked through that too quickly. Anyways, it was supposed to show like a purple one going into the purple bucket. But basically it'll go through and it'll match a filter, otherwise it goes to the default partition. So when you're configuring an index partition, it requires a cluster, sorry, I should update this slide. It requires a service restart in order to recognize that. So you would need to restart all the nodes on your cluster for that to be active. And again, you can have up to 5 partitions right now. That is the limit. It only works with static fields, so the same as log forwarding. And it's going to, if you do have an instance where you have a log message that would meet multiple criteria, then it's going to put it in the bucket that it meets first in alphabetical order. So it's possible to create intersecting filters. So in this example, we're saying partition A has all critical logs and partition B has a host name. So if a critical log from that host name's come in, it's going to go in alphabetical order and it's automatically going to get put in partition A. For log archival, if this is enabled, once you exceed the storage capacity on your environment, it's going to automatically archive those logs instead of overwriting. And so once you were archiving logs, you would need to import that to be searchable. And one thing to note, so if we're doing an offsite or we're archiving to NFS, and you do want to re-import those, you can use the Log Insight importer. We recommend that you use a standalone instance of Log Insight and you not re-ingest data into a live cluster because that can screw up the filters. So if you have retention at 30 days, for example, you don't want to mix in logs that are going to be ingested with a different timestamp. And importing logs is really time consuming. So just something to be aware that if it's fine for a compliance instance if you wanted to go back in that bucket and search for like a day range or something. But if you're having to go in and search for like a month's worth of log data that have been archived, that's going to take days or weeks to import. We had a customer that wanted to re-ingest 12 terabytes of logs from like a month time span. And that's, that's where it could take a month to do that. It'll get it done, but just something to be aware of. You want to limit that time period of the logs you're ingesting as much as possible to decrease the amount of time it's going to take you to review that data.
Hey, Julie, it's Matt. While you're signing in there, there's one open question from Timothy asking about the partitions. Says, does the default bucket partition still act like I would expect to fill up the disk to 97% and then roll?
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
So if you have a retention period that's set longer, say you have something set for 2 months, it's going to preserve those logs before overwriting, or it's going to preserve those logs and it's going to overwrite the logs in the default partition. One other thing to be aware of, though, if it needs that space in that default partition, because there isn't, if there isn't enough space that it can free in the default partition, and you don't have enough storage to back that, it's one thing to be aware of. It's still going to overwrite those, but it will not overwrite those before it overwrites the logs in the default partition. Was there, let me see if there's another question. All right, so this is the administration console. So we have the, this is all listed out for this particular node, and it's going to tell me the amount of storage used. And I recently added storage to this cluster so we could have a few more days of logs, but it is completely normal to see this live storage set at 90%, 97% all the time. That would be expected. I get a lot of questions like, hey, my storage is almost full. I only have 3% left. I need to free up space. Well, log data is immutable, right? You cannot delete log data. It will only roll when it needs the storage. So typically you will see once something's been commissioned for a while, it's going to always be at that 97%. I don't have any active queries going on, but if I was doing a search, in a search, it would show up in here. And statistics, again, this is per node here. I'm seeing all the, sorry, this is per cluster. It's showing here with each of the nodes and the current ingestion rate. So there's 4 nodes in our cluster here, and it's showing the load. As you can see, it's spread out pretty evenly. So in the cluster control panel, this is where you would actually go to download the support bundle or upgrade the cluster. If I click into an individual node, you can see that if I want to restart the node, so say I added an index partition, which would require a restart, I can go ahead and restart this. In a healthy environment, the node should restart fairly quickly, just a matter of a couple minutes. Again, you want to always use a virtual IP address, even if you have a single node, just because it saves you from reconfiguring things in the event that you do want to expand that environment. We do have customers that just have one large node, and that suits them. They don't have compliance or regulatory that's having them keep them highly available so they can take outages, et cetera. So it does happen where customers don't deploy in a cluster. You'll also, this is where you'd add new virtual IPs. So say you had an agent and you wanted to configure agents to set to a separate node. You might do that because you wanted to tag something. So if they're sending to if you have agents configured to send to a specific IP address, or even if you have syslog, you can come in here and tag that value so that that tag is then searchable within interactive analytics. And you can also filter on that, right? So for access control, now if I want to create a new user and I'm creating a new local user, I do need to enter an email address. So if I click save on here, it's not going to allow me to do it. In this case, I'm just going to use my email address. So in the event that you did have a user that didn't have an email address or a test account, you just have to enter a valid one. And then I can set the permissions for this user. So if I want to do like a restricted access, I can do that. So I'm going to save that. And then I've got a new email. So let me do a new incognito window. So I enter in that information and I can set the password. Hopefully those are the same. All right, so then I've got that account created. So there's the default roles that we have, and you can also create new roles using filters. And so that's based on a data set. So what we've done here is we want to limit the users so that they can only see a host name that starts with W, and that's for our Wenatchee DC. So in this case, they would not be able to come in here and search for host names in our Santa Clara data center because those start with an S. So I have a demo user that's demo WDC. I'm going to search in interactive analytics for a host name. So I'm not getting any logs for a host name that starts with S. But I am going to see all the logs that start with W. So that's how data sets work. And so, you could filter if we wanted to look at the criteria for a new one, I can filter on any of these to restrict, right? Let me see if there's any questions in the queue yet.
Nope, nothing right now.
Okay. So yesterday we went over creating user alerts, and we do have, if you're an administrator, you can come in and you can, suspend all alerts. So if you're doing maintenance or something in an environment, you may want to suspend all of the alerts. Otherwise, I can come in here and I can edit an alert. So if I want to change who the email is sent to, like say I had an employee that left the company, I could filter for their name and I could reassign all the alerts to somebody else or a distribution list. You can also enable or disable alerts for maintenance. So if you, we don't have like alert snoozing like we do in the cloud version, so you can't enable it at a specific time, but you can come on in here and enable and disable it so people aren't spammed with alerts during a maintenance period. And I can also export this information if I want to go in and review all the active alerts. So we talked quite a bit about licensing yesterday. If you do want to see all the active hosts in your environment, you can come in here and view that. This is going to show you all of like the ESX hosts. Anything sending a log stream is going to show up in here. Actually, I'm going to go into agents a little bit later, so sorry. All right, so event forwarding. Here, this is we're sending something from our field demo environment to our VCF environment. And what I wanted to demonstrate here is using tags to do the cross-site forwarding. In this case, I'm forwarding all security logs. So these are our domain controllers in here. That's one filter you might use for a SIM solution if you're not using text as a filter. But if we wanted to, so I'm sending all of these to the VCF login site instance and I'm tagging it with DC1. And then if I pop over here, we're at the VCF instance. I've got forward to field demo and it's saying, hey, I'm gonna forward any logs that I get to field demo, and the tag is that I'm gonna put on this is DC2. And then the filters does not match DC1. Notice that I have 0 events forwarding because in this instance, I'm only forwarding logs to this instance that are tagged with DC1. Hopefully that makes sense. I couldn't do the cross-site forwarding because I don't have the environment to back that, but I just wanted to validate for you. So we're getting field demo logs in here, and they're going to be tagged with DC1. But because I have this filter in place, it's not forwarding any of those logs back. So that's what customers use to meet the VVD requirements if they want to do cross-site forwarding versus sending all their logs to a completely separate instance. Okay, it looks like we have quite a few questions.
Yes, we do. We'll start with David's question. Do we still have the option to create built-in users?
Like a local account, I'm assuming that means that's what I just demonstrated. So when I create the local account, it's not going to allow me to set the password, but if I put that email address for the local account, it's going to come and send it to me. If I was using Active Directory or VIDM, it would simply use the password that the user already has configured.
Okay, and David, if it was a different question, then please re-ask it. Then the next question is, are the alerts available in VROps over a plugin or something similar?
You can configure an alert to set to vRLI's operations. So if I go back to user alerts, oh, sorry, I'm in my VCF instance. I was like, what in the world? All right, so by default, nothing's sent to vRLI's operations, but if I wanted to, I could send a notification email, and I could also send that to vRLI's operations, and then I would just select the object that I wanted to fall back on. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Julie. Then we'll save the question about the content pack for VRA8 for later, but while we're talking about alerts, Trey asks, if you disable all alerts and some were already disabled, when you enable all alerts, will Login Site remember what was originally disabled and not enable them?
No.
It will not remember.
What? Well, oh yeah, it does. Sorry, Trey. I've never tried that before, so now we know.
It does remember. That's great. Very cool.
All right, so the restricted. So there's been some talk, Trey, about the read-only admin access. So let's take that offline. Ping me after, and we'll talk about doing that. All right, so I think we pretty much covered event forwarding. So we did the cross-site. If you're doing a SIM solution, I kind of showed that. That's in the PowerPoint deck. But just to reiterate, you can filter based on tags. So if I have a tag in here, so you know, I've added this DC tag, I can filter on that. And so, and you can also filter on multiple values if you want to enter them in here, right? So multiple source IPs, which is probably a pretty typical one where you might have security servers or sensitive servers in your environment that are forwarding to Login Site that you might want to have some advanced analytics, like on a SIM server. You can do that here. So I could put, you know, I could put all my domain controllers in here, or all specific servers in there. All right, partitions. And this is actually something I had set up in my VCF environment. So we have this MOAD logs, and I am filtering based on OpenCart is my search filter, and I only want to retain those for 1 day. You can see it's the I actually quit forwarding Moab logs here. So the oldest log is slightly older than the retention period because that bucket needs to be overwritten. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm only keeping logs for a day, but there is a chance that if a bucket isn't filled, it's not going to overwrite until a new log comes in. And then I can, the default partition is going to show me that information too. I don't see any questions there. For export events, you actually export events based on the, again, I need to bounce back to this other environment. So this is the field demo environment. Export tasks are actually created in interactive analytics. Again, if you weren't on yesterday, you can watch the recording. But what this admin access allows you to do is come in and cancel exports. You do get an email notification now. If you set up an export, you can say, hey, I don't want to monitor it. I just want to get a notification when it's done, and it will send you that information. But in the event that you want to come in here, you can see the details for what the filter was for this particular export. And if I did have an active job running in here, I can disable it. Otherwise, I'll just see the progress. This is where we can manage dashboard URLs that we've already shared. So I can come in here and edit the time frame, or I can simply expire it, or sorry, delete it. Certificates, not much really to say there. This is going to show me all the certificates that I have for, these are all the environments that I'm collecting data from. So these are all my vCenter instances. And then I have some forwarders that I've configured to use SSL. For licensing information, we talked about if they're using per CPU, it's basically an unlimited license if it's bundled with a suite, right? So if you've sold it to your customer and they're doing vRLI suite per CPU, in essence, they will get access to send, it doesn't matter how many agents are sending. And this will give you the running average. So if a customer is using OSI licensing, they can see the running average of their usage. And so we have 302 OSI sending here. If I did want to add a vCenter here, I would just enter the credentials. There are specific rights that you need that I detailed yesterday and are part of the PowerPoint deck because it actually does need to go in and update the syslog information on the host. But it's a subset. They don't need full administrator rights. In this case, I'm just using that. Hopefully I entered the right password. So it tested successful, just like with all our products. It was a simple step, always test the connection. If I save this, it's going to let me know that it's going through the configuration. Obviously, this host is disconnected. And I could also choose that if I didn't want all hosts, I could select that checkbox. So it's not configuring all the hosts. And then for vRLI's operations, it's pretty simple, and we kind of went over yesterday. You do need administrative rights on this if you want to enable launch in context. All right, I do see a question from Bengt in the, has there been any changes for the possibility to forward to Splunk? You can absolutely forward to Splunk. So I'm not sure what is meant by that. You can forward logs to, you know, you could forward them to any solution that accepts RFC compliant logs. There's no out of the box integration for forwarding. So like if you do have to create your own filters. All right, so I'm going to get back into the presentation. So we're going to cover a couple advanced topics. Importing logs. You may want to import logs because you have a support bundle that you want to review, and you want to be able to search it using the filters that are available in Log Insight. So you can send over the ingestion API. It supports a number of, it can read data from like a zip, a tar, etc. And you don't need to do anything. You just point it to the file and it's automatically going to go through there and get the log information. You don't need to unzip that information. And you can stipulate which items you want to include from that file. So running the importer, you can actually run the importer from a Log Insight instance. Again, you want the importing server to be separate. Usually we just use a standalone instance for that. And so you could run it directly from the server. Otherwise, you can install it on a Linux VM or a Linux server, or you could install it on Windows. These are all the options that you can specify on the import. The only ones you need to have are source and server. These are some things that you can do with the manifest file configuration. I'm not going to read through this, but you only would do this if you wanted to kind of filter what you had in there, or tag or specify which directories from that file you wanted. So if you didn't want to ingest all the data in that file, this is where you would want to configure the manifest file. So the Log Insight importer, it doesn't check for available disk space on the node. So it's just going to keep running until it fills up the disk. So make sure you have the proper storage to back it based on the amount of logs you're importing. It's not going to show you progress, but it is, you know, you can see it running through the log files from a command prompt. And when you do ingest the data, it's automatically going to show the source as the source of where the file is imported from. So if you did want to tag, or you did want to include the original source information, you could add a tag with that information. So it's going to pull the source host from the original log file, and it will add that. So this is an example where I just imported a support bundle. And because this is a compressed file, it was a tar file, then it does take a little bit longer to import, say, than if I just went into Log Insight and I exported messages to in raw format. That would go a little bit faster and it would zip through those. This took about an hour and 15 minutes. And this was just like less than a gig support bundle. Oops. So this is where I imported, so I actually imported the Log Insight servers support bundle into here. So like I stipulated, you know, the source notes are actually going to be the server, right? So, and it's showing me the bundle, the support file, the file path, and the host name. Oops. So if I wanted to search for a specific host that's part of my login site cluster from the file imported, I can do that in here. And it's going to give me all that log information. So that's pretty much what I have for log forwarding. If you have any more questions on that, please let me know.
Julie, we've got one from Jim. Has the maximum number of forwarders been increased from 10?
Nope, the limit's still 10. That's not a hard limit. That's a supported limit. Again, if you do have a need for that, if you want to put the customer and the use case in a Looper or AHA ticket, Looper, I guess, if it's going to get added, go ahead and do that.
And what is the impact to going beyond 10? Any performance issues, etc.?
Yeah, it would likely be a performance hit against the cluster.
Cool. Thanks, Julie.
All right, so creating content packs. So we kind of talked about this yesterday, but content packs have queries, extracted fields, dashboards, and alerts. Like every content pack should have all 4 of those, the first 4. In actuality, we do have some vendors that created content packs without any out-of-the-box alerts. You will see an agent group for anything where it needs to install on like Windows or Linux. So you'll see this for the Linux content pack, the Active Directory content pack. They have specific groups because the agent's installed there. So it has automated configuration that we can go in and just say, hey, I put the login site agent on the server. You don't even have to specify anything. If you monitor it from the server, you can just add it to the group. So you should definitely see those for anything that is forwarding using an agent. We do have some best practice guidelines. So we want 3 or more dashboards and 3 or more queries, 5 or more alerts, and 20 or more extracted fields. Again, if you're creating your own content for community supported, you don't have to follow any of these, but if you want VMware engineering to certify something so that it's actually available in the marketplace, this is part of what they evaluated on. So if you're creating an alert, you would do so just like you would that we kind of showed yesterday, and it's automatically going to clear out, you know, if you have specified an email address or anything in that alert, by default, it's not going to include that in there in the content pack. So when you enable the alert as part of the content pack, it's going to ask you for that information. This is just an example. So this is from the Apache content pack. And this is just an example of what type of information they'd like to see. So if you were creating a content pack, this would actually be something that you would have in your own personal dashboards. Like I created the TKG content pack, and then I could go ahead and export that. Every content pack should have detailed instructions for installation. You want to make sure, like if you do require a tag for some of the dashboard filters to work, if you do require like a separate IP address, that all needs to be detailed in there. A good example of this is like the F5 content pack. There's a lot of configuration steps you need to do to get things forwarded properly. And so you'll need to go through all those steps manually. It's not as simple as just installing and forwarding the logs. Once a content pack is published, I need to update the slide. It's actually going to be in the marketplace. I think some of you are aware that marketplace, we're currently working through some things where everything is not showing up. Most content packs are supported by VMware. And so like you'll still see the content packs that we have for Blue Medora. They still say Blue Medora, but we will get that updated. But there are a few content packs that are actually supported by the vendor, and Infoblox is one example. The Linux content pack is actually supported by VMware. The Active Directory content pack, Windows SQL content packs are all owned by VMware. So most cases, they will be coming to VMware for support. But if a vendor comes up with a content pack, they would be responsible for supporting that. This is going to be a pretty short demo, but I just wanted to show you what you would do. So I created this TKG dashboard. Maybe I want to share it with somebody else so that they don't have to recreate this. So I can go into content packs. And down at the bottom, I'll see my content. So this is content that, I may have cloned from an existing dashboard, but I've modified it. So these are all the queries that I've created. These are all the alerts, including alerts that I've enabled from content packs, agent groups, and extracted fields. So I only have one extracted field. Now, when I'm in my content, I can actually export the data. Now, it's not going to export all of this because obviously I don't want to export the data that I've just modified from other content packs. So in this case, I just want to export the dashboard that I created. I could have favorite queries in here. I could add any alerts. Obviously this isn't going to make sense as a TKG pack because I haven't created any specific alerts for that. But you would select every item that is part of that content pack, right? And then once that's done, I would label it appropriately, put the version, the author name. So like Yogita from PSO added a content pack, so she would be the author. Otherwise, it would say like VMware or some such. And you want to fill out all this information as detailed as possible. So. Oh, whoops. So it's going to then export that data into a VLCP file. And I could go ahead and import that into another instance. Why is it not showing up? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm impatient. So anyways, now I have this my content VLCP, and I could go ahead and import that into another instance. So in theory, not in theory, but you could actually, so say you have two instances of Login Site and you want to keep them in sync. We are working on kind of making that a little bit more seamless so that if you have content in one instance, it's in the other, but that's currently not available today. And so what some customers could do is if they have custom content, they might export all that content as part of a content pack and then go import that in a second instance. So again, if I wanted to import a content pack, I could import it to be available to everyone or import into my content, and I would just browse for that VLCP file that I created. Oops. Okay, I was just seeing if there were any questions in the that didn't make it to Q&A, but it looks like we're good. All right. So login site agents. We have, I should have probably done a shout out to the HOL team. Greg Parsons and Kim Delgado did a great lab this year. So getting started with vRLI's login site. And I would suggest if you want to play around with agents, you can do so in the HOL. So you can have a single deployment of an agent and you can custom configure that agent file appropriately, or you can manage it from the server. So again, I'm not going to read this slide, but these are some of the features of the agents. And I get questions a lot, well, what happens if an agent's sending logs, but the server is not available? It will queue those until the cache fills up, but otherwise those log messages do not get forwarded. So the elements of agent configuration, in this instance, we're actually showing this login site forwarder. So we have a login site instance, and that is just accepting logs from agents. You certainly don't need to do this. We don't do this in our environment, but if you wanted to manage all the agent traffic separately from like your ESX hosts or other devices, that's what this is showing here. So you have all the agents coming in through a centralized login site server, and then you're forwarding that to the main login site server. If you, just kind of going back to licensing, because I know this gets asked a lot, if you do have multiple instances, if you're using forwarding for cross-site DR and stuff, you don't have to have multiple licenses in that case, right? It's included if you have multiple servers and you're forwarding. This is what it looks like when you're managing the agents for a cluster. You'll have default agent groups in here that you can then clone and modify them, or clone and apply them to various infrastructures based on filter. This is an example of an agent configuration for Lifecycle Manager. This is all default out of the box, so no one needs to come in here and do this. But if I did want to edit some of the parameters that were out of the box configured, I can go and do that in the agent configuration and automatically push that out. I got a couple slides in here that I just wanted to be available for you. I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but there's different log rotation schemes that you can actually set as part of the agents. Agents are supported pretty much on every platform that you would need, and the latest version actually supports Photon version 3, so you can use it on the latest and greatest. For Windows platform, if you did want to do an MSI for the installation, you can do that. And this is just kind of going through the bulk installation instructions. This is an example of an installation on Linux and the location to the log agent, the login site agent INI file that you can modify. And then I just wanted to throw this out there because we are using FluentD for containers. I've got the link to Munish's blog, which explains how to do that. Before I get started, I'm just going to look back at the questions. Trey had a question, are the content packs interchangeable between LI and LI Cloud? You can import content into both. I have not actually tried to import a content pack that I created in on-prem to cloud, but I can verify and get back to you, Trey, because they are similar. So like if the content pack for SRM on-prem is the same content pack as in the cloud, for example. Is a service account and password encrypted for bulk install? Yes, if you specify SSL, that would be encrypted. All right, so now we're going to get into agents. These are the agents that I currently have installed. And there's all these templates. So what I would do if I had a new system that I wanted to configure, so I've installed the agent and it's reporting in, and now I want to apply a specific configuration, I would come in here and I can copy this template. And then I can go ahead and apply it to specific searches. So I can match on hostname, IP address, OS, or version. And you do have to clone something so that, again, it's kind of like content pack dashboards. We don't want people to make modifications to the default. So you would take the example template agent config for the solution that you're using, and you would clone it, and then you can apply it. We have auto update enabled for all of these. This is where I can come in and edit the configuration for an agent. And let's look at one we already have configured. So here I've created a hostname filter that matches the prefix to all of our domain controllers. So they're all in here. I could have also, actually, no, that's probably the best way to do it. But anyway, I can come in here and edit. For example, like if I wanted to add another server target, so I want it to send to another location, I could do so. Oops. I could modify this information. Sorry, I need to click on new. So if I wanted to add another server that I could forward to, I could add that information in here. And I could also filter that. I could also modify this. So I know Mark was asking yesterday if you could forward the log insight server logs to Splunk. And the log insight server actually comes with the log insight agent installed and pre-configured to send hosts. So I could, if I had an agent where I wanted to send to my log insight server, but I also wanted to send it directly to Splunk, I could come in here and add another server and enter the IP address for that. And then I could modify any of these if I wanted to include additional logs or remove logs, then I would go in here and modify this. And these settings are going to show up in the log insight effective.ini file on the server. So if something's set to be managed by the server, it's automatically going to grab that configuration. And if you modify the log insight.ini file on the local server, it's going to get overwritten. You need to specify if you want it to be managed by the server or if you just want to manage it locally. Obviously, it's a lot easier if you want the centralized config to monitor it locally. Let's see. If you have any questions that I didn't answer on that, please put them in the Q&A. Jim has a question. If we specify SSL for just the agent install or the API, I'm not sure that I understand that question completely, but if you want to send over SSL, you can definitely configure that in the agent config and you can make it required.
And then Julie, I'm typing out an answer to Mark's question, but feel free to add your input as well if you have. Basically, what's the talk track for forwarding to Splunk from Log Insight, given the way we charge per endpoint, the way they charge per terabyte? Is there a common talk track that kind of speaks to that equation? I guess my initial thought is obviously like it depends on the customer, how many endpoints they have, what types of endpoints, what's the log volume. Do you have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, usually, for Splunk, they're looking for security and audit events. So you can save significantly on the storage required to retain like just informational logs. Obviously the security team doesn't need to review all of that. So you can save significantly by filtering the logs in Log Insight and then sending them to Splunk. Because when we talk SIM solution, they care about who's doing what, when, and what resources are being accessed. They don't necessarily care that DRS moved a VM from one cluster to another, but if they did, we could send that information. They don't necessarily care about just informational alerts. They don't care necessarily if there's a host failure or something like that. So our big value add there is because they charge per terabyte, by filtering on Log Insight first, we're saving them on their cost for Splunk or any SIM solution. I hope that answers your question. All right, so Jim has a question. You said the password for the agent install is encrypted when using SSL. Is SSL selected for the install only, meaning I don't want SSL for log forwarding, or does SSL have to be chosen for the agent for the encrypted password? You can specify when you want to use SSL or not. It certainly doesn't have to be enabled. I don't know, Matt, if you are reading that differently, but. See, Trey has a question. Are non-competing settings made in a local? Are non-competing settings made in a local Log Insight agent file pulled back to Log Insight so you can see them in the agents for the host? No, if you're using one of these templates that you've modified, that's what it's going to push out to the host. So if you want to add additional settings, don't do that locally. Do it from this configuration on the agent side. Hopefully that made sense. All right. For the API, we do get a lot of questions on using the API. Actually, I will just. So here's the internal REST API. This includes all the supported APIs, which you'll notice they don't have any, they don't have the lightning bolt. If they have the lightning bolt, that means that it's tech preview, right? So it's subject to change or be removed if customers are using that. And if it's marked with this red X, it's internal use only. So it's available to customers, right? Because it's part of the Log Insight install, but the customers really shouldn't be using this. Obviously, if they want to make their own solutions, they can. Now, as far as having more of the things that are in tech preview, like archival, et cetera, supported, this is a pretty significant effort by engineering. And so if you do have things that you want to get prioritized, then definitely fill out a request and let people know. We already have a feature request in. That's pretty common, as people want to configure forwarding using the API. And so that is on the top list of things to get approved. I don't have any ETA on that. There's a lot of engineering work being done in other areas, but so these APIs that you've seen in tech preview for a long time, that's because of the amount of effort it would take to get those fully supported. You can use those. There's kind of a best effort support there. So if, like I said, get those in if you wanted them supported, because we can't just say, hey, why aren't all the ones in tech preview supported? You know, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get absolutely everything in there. So let's get the ones in there that customers are really asking us about a lot, and then we can try to move some of those from tech preview into fully supported. All right, I have one last slide. People always ask me, well, what's the difference between login site on-prem and login site cloud? So I'm kind of going to run through this list, and I might add a little bit more color, so pardon me, but I'm actually going to read them. So the agent that we use for on-prem is the login site agent. For login site cloud, we are moving to FluentD for app and OS logs. If you have a native AWS application, that's what we're going to use to send the logs. So all the AWS log sources are using FluentD for that, so that there is a little bit of a difference there. As far as alerts go, if you want to enable or disable alerts in login site, as you see, it's either enabled or it's disabled. In login site cloud, you actually have the ability to snooze alerts for specific things. So you can filter events and you can multi-select alerts based on your search criteria, and you can like say, hey, I want to snooze this for 30 minutes while I'm troubleshooting in an hour or 6 hours. Or if you have maintenance, you can schedule the snoozing to occur during that time period. Alerts are managed from interactive analytics in login site on-prem, and alerts have their own category under management in the cloud version. For configuration, you need an API key. In the cloud version, we don't use API keys. On-prem, for the on-prem version, content packs are updated, meaning if we have a new vSphere content pack, we're going to update that. And then instead of version 1, for example, that content pack is going to be version 2. Currently in login site cloud, there's multiple content packs for different applications. So if I rev the vSphere content pack, I'm going to see in the UI actually the version 1 and version 2. And I do have that as a feature request to make that so they're updated, so that we don't have multiple content packs with different versions. For dashboard usage and on-prem, we have the legend available on dashboards. And currently in the on-prem version, dashboards do not have this information. That's also been added as a feature request. Actually, sorry, I have these two backwards, so I need to update this before providing the deck. For a login site on-prem, you can resize widgets. For cloud, you can drag and drop widgets and resize and move them around. There's kind of a design canvas. And again, we are going over login site cloud next Friday. So you'll get the demo and all the details there. For integration, we configure the integration for the on-prem version. If you want to integrate vRLI's operations cloud with vRLI's login site cloud, that's actually configured on the back end. We don't have Wavefront integration on-prem, we do in the cloud. For licensing, obviously there's a big difference, just like all our SaaS products. The cloud version is going to be based on ingestion. So, you know, you can buy 1 year based on your ingestion rate, or 3 year, or you can do on demand. One thing I will note about the cloud version is it's all based on ingestion. So you could forward to 10 different locations You know, you could forward to Splunk or Datadog or whatever, and that's not, there's no charge for that. It's ingress only. For log management, one of the pain points people have is not being able to just enable or disable log forwarding on-prem. That's a feature request for on-prem to be able to toggle that on and off. And currently in the cloud, you are able to toggle on and off forwarders. So if you just want to enable them for a certain period of time, but you want to retain all the settings, you can do that. I know this got asked yesterday on-prem. It's on the roadmap to be able to, and again, I have this backwards. I apologize. I will fix this. On-prem, you cannot mask logs right now. That's on the roadmap. In the cloud version, you can mask logs. So if you want to remove credit card numbers, if for some reason not showing up, phone numbers, IP addresses, you can put in the regex value to remove those values or put asterisks in or something like that. For on-prem version, we're getting all of the events because you own all vCenter events because you own that infrastructure. In AWS, it's very specific that because VMC or AWS manages that infrastructure, you are only going to get security and audit events. You're not going to see like if a host PSODs or something like that. That's not your concern. That's on the AWS side. So you just get the security and audit events for your vSphere environment. Log management, you can do syslog forwarding over SSL in the cloud version. You can do it over HTTPS. We do have the importer that I demoed today for on-prem. Currently, you can't ingest data into the cloud, but we are working on that for the end of the year. And the cloud, we're not going to have any storage limits. So right now, the max storage we can have per cluster is 72 terabytes. I think we do actually have some customers that are on RPQ to support 5 terabytes per cluster, or sorry, per node, rather, for on-prem. But the official supported is 4 terabytes, which brings us up to the 72 terabytes per cluster. Where in the cloud, we're based on retention, which is the paid version by default is going to give you 30 days of retention. We have had some customers want 60 days of retention or 90 days. Currently, that's not built into the model. But in any case, they're not going to say, hey, you get 5 terabytes or you get 100 terabytes. It's solely based on days. So there's really no limit to how much storage can be used to back that 30-day retention. For log management, we have the unlimited export available on-prem, and in the cloud version, currently you are limited to 2,000 events. In the on-prem version, we're archiving to NFS, and in the cloud, people always say, well, how much is it to archive my log data in Log Insight Cloud? And that is based on AWS solely because we're archiving to an S3 bucket. So that falls on the AWS side for billing. And for the public cloud, on-prem can't ingest cloud logs natively. You could have your cloud logs forward to on-prem, just using a forwarder in the cloud to on-prem. So you could get those public cloud logs on-prem, but you would need an on-prem instance to do so. And obviously, Log Insight Cloud was designed for the cloud. So right now we have a number of AWS log sources. We have the VMC on AWS stuff, and we are working on Azure and GCP. For Log Insight on-prem, we are doing a lot around STIG. We have the DoD attestation. So when somebody logs in, we have the local account password policies where you can set a complex password. And we don't have those capabilities in the cloud currently. Let's see, one thing I wanted to show you, I'm in this instance. So under the general tab, if a customer is running 8.2, this is where they can enable the DoD consent agreement. So I do have it configured on this instance, and we can also do the password policy restriction, right? So those are some pretty complex passwords. It's going to be a 15-character password. And so you can enforce that on local accounts for the on-prem version. And this was directly a result of FIPS and STIG compliance. So, all right. That is what I had for you today. So I will just open it up for questions for anyone who wants to hang out.
You can answer in or ask questions in QA, or if you have a longer question, you can put your hand up and I'll enable you to talk if you want. Jim's got a hand up. Jim, is that old or new?
I guess that's old.
Yeah, looks like it. Looks like it. Okay. So if anybody has any questions going on, they can reach out to you directly, or you have a Slack channel? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they've got additional questions?
Yeah, if you have additional questions, you can either email me or hit me up on Slack. That's fine. If you have specific questions around engineering, we have I'll Ask LI Engineering Slack group. So if you and we have a log insight group. So I'm pretty active on looking at those, and the engineers for log insight are absolutely fantastic. They are on top of all those questions in log insight engineering, Ask Log Insight Engineering rather. So if you do have questions, they are an awesome team to work with.
Awesome. Fantastic. All righty, folks. Well, with that, I think we can probably call it a day and give you some time back. And so, Julie and team, we will see you next Friday for the cloud version if we don't see you before. Thanks to everyone who joined, and bye.